Well, we got the war over with then. The War of 1812 came to kind of a half-conclusive end. We didn't exactly win. I mean, we status quo antebellum. It's sort of like it's a tie. Nobody wins, nobody loses, and that's there. Um, so let's look now. I want to talk about sort of the consequences of the war, the aftermath of the war. What happened as a result of this war? And I've already mentioned one little fact, which we're going to be coming back to, and we won't do anything more with it today, but we're going to get back to the fact that now this American general, Andrew Jackson, is a great national hero. He's the man who gave us this great, glorious victory. As I said, we started the war with a real optimistic, real enthusiastic thing, great deal of patriotism and enthusiasm for the war and everything. And then it went out very badly for us. And then at the very end, did get a great victory. And it was all because of Andrew Jackson, and it was because of his careful thinking about where the British Army was going to go, and looking at maps and figuring, well, that they're going to have to come up here, they're going to have to come up here, we'll put our forces here, we'll put the troops here, we'll build some barricades to protect them so that they can fire at the British without being exposed. And he did a very good job of that. He was a very capable general. And in the United States, he's just this great hero. Everybody just loves him. Great, glorious Andrew Jackson, Andrew Jackson. So that was one of the consequences. Another consequence was, when that battle took place, the Hartford Convention was still underway. It was still going on. And it had been going on for a couple of weeks, and they'd been discussing. And here all of a sudden they're saying, oh, this war is a great disaster, we've got to get out of the war. They'd even been saying, although this was not made public, and this, as I said, was not adopted, but that we're even saying, we're going to leave the United States because the war is so horrible, we can't be in the war, and so forth. And then Jackson has this great victory, great America, we're #1, and the Federalists, who had been running the Hartford Convention, looked like they were unpatriotic, anti-American. They're down on America. They're totally disgraced. It was like the last blow for the Federalist Party. The only thing that had been keeping them alive was the opposition to the war. The war is over. The Federalist Party had no reason to exist anymore, and it ceased to do that. Now, in the election of 1816, which is going to come up right in the year after the war is over, the Federalists nominated some candidate. I don't even know who it was. You never heard of him. They did still have a party. They did have a nominee for president, but he did very poorly. I think he only carried like one state or something. He carried the state of Delaware. Delaware had always been a real center of Federalist support. Delaware was the first state to ratify the Constitution. Federalism is very strong in Delaware for some reason. And Delaware may have voted for the Federalist Party candidate, but basically it was a very strong victory for the Republican Party. Their candidate was James Monroe, and he won a decisive victory in 1816. In 1820, there was no Federalist candidate. James Monroe ran unopposed, and he was elected for all intents and purposes unanimously. And the only reason he didn't get a unanimous vote was because by common agreement, one of the Republican electors voted against him, just so that the honor of a unanimous vote in the Electoral College would only go to George Washington, the great father of our country. And so just to keep the honor preserved for Washington, Monroe did not get a unanimous vote, but there was nobody running against him, so he basically won unanimously. The Federalist Party was gone. There is now in the United States, as of 1816, really only one party. The Republican Party had become the sole party. So we call this period time of American history, after 1816, sometimes people call it the era of good feeling, or the era of good feelings. And the idea is there's no more partisanship. There's no more political animosity. There's no more party politics. There's only one party. There can't be any party politics. So we're sort of back to that image that Washington had wanted, that the people at the Constitutional sort of wanted, where we would not have political divisiveness in this country. That sort of was a dream that we had had. We don't like partisan politics. Washington was very unhappy that the country got divided into Federalist and Republican while he was still president. He was very unhappy about that. He wanted the old days that when we were all united and just in working together as one people, not divided. And we're back to that. We're back to the idea that there's only one party, and so we're all united. And the Republican Party has become the only party. One of the consequences then of the War of 1812 was that it was the death blow of the Federalist Party, which had been going downhill ever since 1800, and then they kind of killed themselves with their support of the Hartford Convention. That turned out to be the timing of it was just very bad, because they're still talking about this, and then the word comes in, hey, we just got this great battle at New Orleans, and the Federalists looked like fools. So they kind of killed themselves. So the Federalist Party has gone away, and now we only have the Republicans. Now the Republican Party, the party of Jefferson, had always been, as you've been following, we've always been committed, the Republican Party had always been committed to the idea that we're a federation of states. They'd been committed to the idea of a limited federal government. They'd been committed to opposition to Hamilton's plans, especially the Bank of the United States. They'd always been committed to the idea that the United States was a republic. And as a republic, we need to have active representation in government. We have to have people, representatives, running the government. That's the whole idea of a republic, is that it's run by elected representatives of the people. But that means that we have to have a lot of people voting. People, if we're going to have an active republic, we have to have a strong voting people. You know, we can't be like England, where only 5% or some other very low number of people can vote. I mean, England is not a republic. It'll never be. It's a hopeless case. We don't want to be like that. That's what we are. We're the United States. We're sort of the anti-England. And England has, you know, this very elitist system where they have, you know, just virtual representation. They don't have active elections because so few people can vote anyway. We can't be like that. We've got to have people voting. And voting means that you own land. So that means we're a nation of small farmers. And I've stressed that that's the Jeffersonian ideal for America. We want to be a nation of small farmers. That's what we'd always been, and that's what we need to remain. And it's partly because that's the key to being a republic. You have to have a lot of voters, so you have to have a lot of landowners. So you want to have everybody be a landowner, a nation of small farmers. That's the goal, because it's not just that that's desirable from an economic standpoint. That's the key to having a republic, and that's the key to freedom. The title of the book, Give Me Liberty. The key to liberty is to have people being able to vote, people owning land, people having a nation of small farmers. It's all part of this picture of why we want America to be what it was, a nation of small farmers and a republic, because they go together. I hope you can follow all of that. If you don't, send me an email and I'll try to go over it with you, because I think it's really important to get that. That's sort of one of the key concepts that you need to get out of this whole period of American history. Well, now the Republicans are in a majority, and they say, you know what, maybe it's not quite so simple. Maybe we don't want to do that. We saw during the war that being a nation of small farmers was not always that desirable. the whole Jefferson image had been that the United States would be a nation of small farmers, and we would produce all these agricultural goods, and we would export them to England or other industrial countries, and we would import industrial goods. We want industrial goods. We want manufactured goods. Manufactured goods are a key to a modern, comfortable life. You want all sorts of things for your homes. You want industrial production to produce all sorts of creature comforts, and so you need manufactured goods. But in the Jeffersonian image here of a good America, we just import those. We don't need to produce them ourselves. We'll be a nation of small farmers. We'll produce agricultural goods and we'll export it, and then we'll trade for it, and we'll get all of the manufactured goods that we need, and we'll get them especially from England. And England can have all the manufacturing that it wants, but that's not good. Industrialization leads to industrial poverty. It leads to the cities of industrial England, which were hellholes. The working conditions in English industrial cities were terrible. Living conditions were terrible. Life in industrial America, in industrial England rather, life in industrial England for the working class was horrible. The best thing about it was that it was very short. The death rate of life expectancy in English towns was very low. Living conditions, working conditions were so bad. We don't want any of that in America. Let England have it. Let England have all of the terrible factories and all of the terrible things that go with factories, and we'll just have all the benefits of it by importing all of the manufactured goods that you produce, and then you need to have our food because you can't feed your people, so many of your people are working in factories instead of living on farms. So you don't have enough food, so you'll have to buy food from us, and we'll be happy to sell you all the food you need, and then we'll get all of the trade, we'll get all of the good stuff from your manufactured goods, and you'll have all the bad stuff, and we'll have all the good stuff. And so that's the Jeffersonian ideal. We'll be a nation of small farmers and da-da-da. Well, we found out, first of all, when we tried to have the embargo, that we're not always guaranteed of trade. England was perfectly willing to stop trading with us. They'll live with the embargo because it turns out they really didn't need our food goods that badly. Now, our embargo probably hurt England. It probably caused shortages of some food there. It may have caused some famine. It may have been really tough on England not to have the imports from the United States, but the embargo hurt the United States more than it did them. And the failure of the embargo was kind of a setback for Jeffersonian Republicans, because it kind of made it seem like, wait a minute, this is not always going to work right. And many, many people in the United States, and they're all Republican, because everybody's Republican by definition, that's the only party. But many Republicans started saying, you know what, maybe we should have some manufacturing here. Maybe we should have some industrial growth. Maybe industrial growth isn't all bad. Maybe we need to be truly independent of England. I mean, we want to be independent. I mean, this is the whole big thing. We made this big deal about the Declaration of Independence in 1776 and da-da-da-da. But, if we keep relying on England to manufacture goods instead of us manufacturing them ourselves, we're really not independent of England. We still depend on England. And we rely on them for all of the manufactured goods that we need to maintain a modern standard of living in our country. So maybe we should produce some of our own goods in order to become truly independent of England. And that doesn't mean just politically independent. We're politically independent. We've got our own country and our own government and so forth. So we're politically independent, but economically, we're still dependent on England. So many people in this country, and these are Republicans now, Republicans are saying, maybe we should have some of our own manufacturing so we can become economically independent of England as well as politically independent. Now these are Republicans, but they're saying, in contrast to classical Jeffersonian philosophy, the whole Jeffersonian Republican image of us as a nation of small farmers, maybe we need to change that. Maybe we need to have some manufacturing. That doesn't mean we're going to get rid of agriculture. We're still going to be mostly farmers. But we need to find room for industry to develop and grow in the United States. And one of the ways to do that is through a tariff. Tariffs have always been viewed as a way to promote industrialization. We put tariffs on manufactured goods, and then American manufacturers can compete against English manufacturers because Americans will not have to pay those tariffs, but England will, and that will add to their costs. And if you raise the tariffs high enough, then they become protective. We can protect American manufacturing against English manufacturing with all of their cheap labor. Now, we'd had tariffs since 1789. That had been one of the first pieces of legislation passed by Congress as sort of the first step of Hamilton's financial program back in 1789, if you remember that whole program. But as I told you at that time, and I spent some time trying to explain to you how tariffs work, and how tariffs can be either for revenue or for protection, or both. It's not an either or, but depending on how high you set the tariffs, they'll either be for revenue only, or maybe for a little bit for revenue and a little bit of protection, or a lot of protection. Well, in 1816, Republicans in Congress passed a new tariff law that significantly raised tariffs in order to make them protective, to have protective tariffs in the United States. And it's to protect our own manufacturing. Now, this was done in 1816, partly because of a need to protect one of our first major industries in the United States. We had actually started some manufacturing during the war. When the war was going on, and even before that, when we were sometimes not trading with England, depending on whether the Embargo Act was in effect, or what the Non-Intercourse Act was in effect, or whatever it was, back and forth. So there had been a lot of years there when we did not trade with England. And then, of course, during the war, we did not trade with England. And that meant that there were some industrial goods that we were normally importing from England, which we couldn't import because of the trade, but there were things that we needed. So we had started some manufacturing in the United States during those war years. The first major industry that started to develop in the United States was a familiar first industry for developing countries. The United States was like England. England had developed this industry back in the 17th century, and now the United States in the 19th century is doing it too. It's a basic industry, and the reason it's a first industry for a lot of developing countries is because it meets a very basic human need, the need for textiles. So in our next lecture, which you can see when you wish, we're going to start by looking at the textile industry in the United States.